If someone had asked me 5 years ago what love looked like, I would have described exhaustion. I would have told them love meant trying harder, smiling even when your heart hurts, saying I'm sorry for things you didn't do, changing pieces of yourself until you barely recognize the woman staring back from the bathroom mirror. My name is Emily Carter, and I lived in Madison, Wisconsin, in a quiet neighborhood where every front porch looked like it belonged on a postcard. From the outside, my life appeared comfortable. I taught third grade at Lincoln Elementary, owned a tidy little craftsman house, and had been dating Ryan Bennett for nearly 6 years. Everyone assumed we'd eventually get married. I assumed it too. Looking back now, I wonder if I ever actually fell in love with Ryan, or if I simply fell in love with the future I imagined we'd have. Because the truth is, our relationship didn't collapse overnight. It disappeared one small disappointment at a time. Ryan wasn't cruel. That almost made it worse. He wasn't the kind of man who screamed or threw things across the room. He simply had an incredible talent for making me feel invisible, while convincing me it was my responsibility to earn his attention. Whenever I planned something special, he was busy. Whenever I needed comfort, he was tired. Whenever I wanted to talk about our future, he'd kiss my forehead and say, "Why are you always overthinking everything, Em?" At first, I believed him. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe I expected too much. Maybe love wasn't supposed to feel easy. So I worked harder. I learned his favorite meals by heart. I rearranged my weekends around his schedule. I skipped girls' trips because he hinted he'd miss me, only for him to spend those same weekends golfing with friends. Every sacrifice felt temporary. I kept telling myself one day he'd notice everything I was doing. One day he'd appreciate me. One day he'd choose me the way I chose him every single day. That day never came. The first crack appeared on an October afternoon. The leaves around Madison had turned brilliant shades of red and gold, and I'd spent weeks planning Ryan's 35th birthday. I'd reserved a private room at his favorite steakhouse, invited his closest friends, ordered a custom bourbon cake because he'd once casually mentioned wanting one. I even bought him a vintage watch he'd admired months earlier in an antique shop. The dinner reservation was for 7. At 6:30, my phone buzzed. "Ryan." I smiled before answering. "Hey," I said. His voice sounded distracted. "I'm not gonna make it." I laughed softly. "Very funny." "I'm serious." The smile disappeared from my face. "What do you mean you're serious?" "My boss invited me to a Bucks game." I waited. Surely he'd continue. Surely he'd say he turned it down because he already had birthday plans. Instead, he said, "I figured we could celebrate another night." I stared at the decorations covering the restaurant tables. His friends had already arrived. His parents were parking outside. I whispered, "Ryan, I planned this for weeks." "I know. I spent thousands of dollars. You didn't have to." That sentence hit harder than he probably intended. You didn't have to. Not thank you. Not I'm sorry. Not I appreciate it. Just, you didn't have to. I remember standing in that restaurant hallway while servers walked past carrying trays of food. My chest hurts. Not because he'd chosen basketball over me, but because he genuinely couldn't understand why it mattered. His mother asked where he was. I lied. Traffic. Then I lied again. He's almost here. By 8 o'clock, everyone knew he wasn't coming. His father awkwardly patted my shoulder. His mother hugged me a little too long. His friends quietly paid their own bills before leaving. I drove home with the untouched birthday cake in my back seat. Ryan texted around 11. "Great game. We'll do dinner tomorrow. Love you." No apology, no explanation. Just confidence that I'd still be there tomorrow. And I was. That's the part I'm most ashamed of. Not because staying makes someone weak, but because every time I accepted less than I deserved, I taught him exactly how little effort was required to keep me. The next morning, I handed him the watch. He smiled. "Oh, this is nice." Nice. He didn't ask about the dinner, didn't ask how much money I'd lost, didn't ask if I was okay. Instead, he admired the watch in the sunlight and kissed my cheek before leaving for work. I stood in the kitchen holding 2 untouched slices of birthday cake, one for him, one for me. Neither of us ever ate them. That should have been the day I walked away. But leaving someone you've spent years loving isn't as simple as recognizing they're hurting you, especially when you've built your entire identity around convincing them you're worth loving. So instead of leaving, I tried harder. I had no idea that the hardest lesson of my life wasn't going to be learning how to make someone love me. It was going to be learning that I never should have had to. Before we get into it, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The morning after Ryan skipped his own birthday dinner, I woke up with the familiar heaviness in my chest. For a few seconds, before I was fully awake, I forgot what had happened. Then I looked at the empty side of the bed. Ryan had already left for work without saying goodbye, just like he did most mornings. On the kitchen counter sat the vintage watch box I'd wrapped with so much care. The lid was open, the tissue paper crumpled. Beside it was a sticky note in his rushed handwriting. "Thanks again. See you tonight." That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of the dinner I'd planned, the money I'd spent, or the humiliation of standing in front of his family pretending everything was fine. I folded the note into the smallest square possible and slipped it into the junk drawer. At the time, I didn't know why. Now I realize I was quietly collecting proof that I wasn't imagining things. Teaching 3rd grade usually made everything else disappear. Children don't care if your heart is breaking. They care whether you'll read another chapter of Charlotte's Web, whether the class hamster escaped again, or whether you remembered it was pajama day. Their joy was uncomplicated. Mine wasn't. That afternoon, while my students worked on art projects, my coworker and closest friend, Megan Foster, leaned against my classroom door during her planning period. "You look exhausted." I forced a smile. "Just didn't sleep well." She crossed her arms. "Emily." Nobody said my name the way Megan did when she knew I was lying. I sighed. "Ryan missed his birthday dinner." She blinked. What? He went to a basketball game. For his own birthday? I nodded. She stared at me for several seconds before speaking. "And you're telling me this like it's normal." "It's not normal." "No," she said gently. "It's become normal." Those words stayed with me long after she walked away. There's a difference. One means something happened. The other means you've accepted that it'll keep happening. That evening, I cooked Ryan's favorite meal anyway. Grilled salmon, roasted potatoes, green beans with garlic butter. I lit candles because I convinced myself maybe we'd laugh about yesterday. Maybe he'd apologize. Maybe this would be the moment everything changed. He came home 40 minutes late. His tie was loosened. His phone never left his hand. "Smells good," he said. I smiled hopefully. "I thought we could celebrate tonight." He looked confused. "For what?" I laughed awkwardly. "Your birthday." "Oh. Oh." He sat down, took 2 bites, and answered another text message. I watched him smile at whatever he'd read. I couldn't remember the last time he'd smiled at me like that. "So," I said carefully, "about yesterday." He didn't even look up. "What about it?" I was hurt. "I know." I waited. "Nothing." "You don't have anything else to say?" He finally set his fork down. "Emily, how many times are we going to have this conversation?" "What conversation?" The one where you make everything into a bigger deal than it needs to be. I felt something tighten inside my chest. It wasn't a small deal. It was one dinner. It wasn't about dinner. He rubbed his forehead dramatically. Here we go. No, I said quietly. Please listen. I am listening. No. You're waiting for me to stop talking. He leaned back in his chair. Fine. Say whatever you need to say. His voice sounded patient, almost rehearsed, like a father humoring an emotional child. I suddenly couldn't remember what I'd wanted to say. That's what happened whenever we argued. I'd walk into the conversation knowing exactly why I was hurt. By the end, I wasn't sure if I had the right to be hurt at all. 2 weeks later, my parents came to town from Minneapolis, Minnesota, for Thanksgiving. My mother, Susan Carter, hugged me the second I opened the front door. She held me a little longer than usual. Mama, I laughed. You're crushing me. I know, she smiled. I missed you. Ryan was polite. Always polite. He helped carry luggage. He complimented my mother's pie. He laughed with my father, Daniel Carter, while watching football. If you'd met him that afternoon, you'd have thought he was the perfect partner. That was the confusing part. He wasn't unkind in public. He simply saved his indifference for when we were alone. After dinner, Mom found me washing dishes. She quietly dried each plate beside me. Then she asked, "Are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. Of course. She didn't answer. Instead, she placed another plate into the cabinet. You know, she said softly, your grandmother used to tell me something. I smiled. What? When someone loves you, she paused, you shouldn't have to convince yourself every day. The room suddenly felt too warm. I laughed because crying would have exposed everything. Ryan loves me. I didn't say he doesn't. She looked into my eyes. I'm asking whether you feel loved. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure. December arrived with fresh snow covering Madison. Christmas lights decorated every neighborhood. Couples walked hand in hand through holiday markets. Everyone seemed to be celebrating something. Meanwhile, I was measuring my worth by how quickly Ryan answered my text messages. If he replied within 10 minutes, I felt relieved. If it took 3 hours, I wondered what I'd done wrong. I analyzed punctuation, emoji, tone, silence. Love had quietly turned into anxiety. I just didn't recognize it yet. One Friday evening, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, trying on my 4th sweater before Ryan's office Christmas party. What about this one? I asked. He barely glanced up. Sure. Does it look okay? Emily. What? You worry too much. Maybe I did. Or maybe I'd spent so many years trying to become the woman he wanted that I no longer knew who I was without his approval. At the party, Ryan introduced me to his coworkers. This is Emily. No, my girlfriend. No pride. No affection, just, this is Emily. For the rest of the night, he disappeared into conversations, leaving me standing alone with strangers balancing glasses of wine. At one point, I watched him laughing with a woman from marketing. She touched his arm. He didn't move away. I told myself not to overreact. I had become an expert at that. On the drive home, he talked excitedly about work promotions and new clients. He never asked if I'd enjoyed the evening. He assumed I had. Or maybe he simply never thought about it. I looked out the window as snowflakes drifted beneath the streetlights. For reasons I couldn't explain, I suddenly imagined what my life would look like 5 years from now if nothing changed. The image terrified me, because for the first time, I realized I wasn't afraid of losing Ryan. I was afraid of losing myself. By January, I had become someone I barely recognized. Not because I'd changed all at once, but because I had changed so slowly that I never noticed it happening. I stopped buying clothes I liked because Ryan once joked that I tried too hard. I stopped playing the piano because he complained it was distracting while he watched television. I stopped inviting friends over because he preferred a quiet house. One by one, the things that made me feel like Emily quietly disappeared. The strange part was that Ryan never demanded those sacrifices. I offered them, every single one, because somewhere along the way, I started believing love was earned by becoming easier to love. And every time he pulled away, I convinced myself I simply hadn't tried hard enough. One Saturday morning, I was cleaning the hall closet when I found an old photo album from college. Inside were pictures of me at 21, laughing so hard my eyes disappeared, standing in front of Lake Michigan with wind-blown hair, covered in paint during an art fundraiser, holding a microphone at karaoke while my friends doubled over laughing. I stared at that young woman for a long time. She looked fearless, bright, completely comfortable taking up space. I couldn't remember the last time I'd looked like that. Ryan walked past the hallway and glanced down at the album. "What are you looking at?" "College pictures." He shrugged. "You've changed." For a second, I smiled. Maybe he'd noticed something good. "Really?" "Yeah." He laughed lightly. "You used to be a lot more fun." The words settled over me like cold rain. I wanted to ask him when I'd stopped being fun. Was it when I started organizing my life around his? Was it when I gave up weekends with friends because he wanted me home? Was it when I stopped laughing because I was constantly worried about saying the wrong thing? Instead, I quietly closed the album. A week later, Megan insisted we have coffee after work. "No excuses," she said. We met at a little cafe near the Capitol Square. The smell of cinnamon and fresh espresso reminded me of the afternoons we'd spent there during our first year of teaching. Back then, we'd laugh for hours. Now I spent most of my time checking my phone. Megan noticed. "You're waiting for Ryan to text." You've looked at your phone 11 times. I counted because I knew you wouldn't notice. Embarrassment flooded my face. He usually tells me when he's heading home. And I like knowing. She leaned forward. "No." I frowned. "What?" "You need reassurance because you spend every day wondering where you stand." I looked away. "That's not true." "Emily." Her voice softened. "When was the last time he made you feel secure?" I searched my memory. Birthdays? Anniversaries? Vacations? Ordinary Tuesdays? Nothing came. Not one clear moment. Megan reached across the table and gently covered my hand. "You keep trying to become enough for someone who has never asked whether he's enough for you." I laughed nervously. "You're making him sound awful." "I'm making him sound emotionally unavailable. That's different." It feels the same to the person waiting. That evening, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I planned a date. Not because Ryan asked, because I desperately wanted us to reconnect. I bought tickets to an outdoor winter festival in downtown Madison. Ice sculptures. Live music. Hot chocolate. Fire pits. It reminded me of our second date years ago. I even wrapped the tickets inside a little card that read, "I miss us." Ryan opened it while standing in the kitchen. "Oh, you don't like it?" "No, it's fine." "Fine." That word again. "We could go Saturday." "I'll see." "What do you mean you'll see?" "My friends might want to watch the playoff game." I smiled weakly. "The festival only lasts one weekend. We'll figure something out." He left the room carrying the tickets. They stayed on the coffee table untouched for 3 days. Saturday morning arrived. I woke up hopeful anyway. Around noon, he walked downstairs wearing jeans and a Packers sweatshirt. You ready? I asked. For what? The festival. He looked genuinely surprised. Oh, I forgot. My heart sank. My friends are already on their way. He grabbed his keys. We'll do something next weekend. Then he kissed the top of my head like he was comforting a child, and walked out the door. I sat alone for almost an hour. The tickets were still sitting on the coffee table. Finally, I picked them up. I could have stayed home. Instead, I went by myself. The festival was beautiful. Families laughed together while children skated across the ice. Older couples held hands beneath strings of white lights. Teenagers roasted marshmallows over open fires. Everyone seemed to belong to someone. I wandered between booths feeling invisible. At one point, I bought 2 cups of hot chocolate out of habit. The cashier smiled. Waiting for someone? I looked at the second cup, then quietly said, no. I threw it away before I reached the parking lot. The following Wednesday, our school held a family literacy night. Parents came with their children to read books, play games, and meet teachers. Near the end of the evening, one of my students tugged on my sleeve. Miss Carter? Yes, sweetheart. My mommy says you're really nice. I smiled. That's sweet. She tilted her head. Why do you always look sad? Children don't filter their observations. They simply tell the truth adults try to ignore. I forced a smile. I don't think I do. You smile with your mouth. She pointed gently toward my eyes. But not here. She ran back to her mother before I could answer. That innocent comment stayed with me all night. When I got home, Ryan was sitting on the couch watching television. I stood in the doorway for several seconds. He didn't look up. I suddenly wondered what would happen if I disappeared. Not forever, just stopped trying, stopped planning, stopped apologizing, stopped reminding him about birthdays, stopped carrying every emotional responsibility in our relationship. Would he notice? Or would he simply enjoy how quiet everything became? For the first time in 6 years, I didn't walk over to kiss him. I didn't ask about his day. I simply went upstairs. 10 minutes later, he called from the living room. Emily? Yeah? Are you okay? I don't know. There was a long silence. Then he asked the question that changed everything. Why are you acting so different? I stood in our bedroom staring out the window at the snow falling over Madison. And suddenly the answer came to me with painful clarity. Because I was tired. Not tired of loving him. Tired of begging someone to love me back. Ryan came upstairs a few minutes later. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. Slow, unhurried. Like this was just another disagreement that would disappear by morning. He leaned against the bedroom door. What was that supposed to mean? I looked at him for a long moment before answering. What? You said you're tired of begging me to love you. I didn't say it to start a fight. Well, it feels like one. I sat on the edge of the bed. I'm not trying to fight, Ryan. I'm trying to tell you how I've been feeling for a long time. He folded his arms. So, what? You think I don't love you? I honestly don't know anymore. The words hung between us. For the first time in years, I hadn't softened them. I hadn't added, maybe I'm wrong. I hadn't apologized for saying them. Ryan let out a slow breath. I've been here, haven't I? I frowned. What does that mean? It means I come home every night. I pay my share of the bills. I'm faithful. I don't lie to you. I listened quietly. He sounded like he was listing the minimum requirements for being in a relationship. I know you do those things, I said. Then what's the problem? The problem is that I don't feel like your partner. He shook his head. I think your expectations are unrealistic. I felt my stomach tighten. My expectations? You always need reassurance. I need affection. I show affection. When I kissed you before I left today. I stared at him. Ryan. See? Nothing I do is ever enough. His words caught me off guard. For years, I had believed I was the only one who felt that way. Now he was saying it too. But there was a difference. I wasn't asking him to become someone else. I was asking him to show up. That night, neither of us slept well. Ryan faced the wall. I faced the window. The silence between us felt louder than any argument we'd ever had. Around 3 in the morning, I walked downstairs and made myself a cup of tea. As I stood in the kitchen, I remembered something my father used to tell me when I was little. Never chase people who are walking away from you. If they want to stay, they will walk beside you. At 12 years old, I thought he was talking about playground friendships. At 33, I realized he had been talking about life. The next afternoon, I drove to Minneapolis to spend the weekend with my parents. I told Ryan I needed some space. He didn't argue. He simply nodded. Okay, just okay. A small part of me had hoped he'd stop me, ask me to stay, fight for us. Instead, he kissed my forehead and said, "Drive safe." The 4-hour drive felt strangely peaceful. No tension. No waiting for my phone to buzz. No wondering whether I'd said something wrong. For the first time in months, I rolled the windows down despite the cold and let the fresh air fill the car. I hadn't realized how heavy my life had become until I stepped away from it. Mom was waiting on the porch when I arrived. She hugged me before I even reached the front steps. "You look tired." "I am." She didn't ask any more questions. She simply led me inside. That evening, after dinner, Dad and I sat in the garage, the way we used to when I was growing up. He handed me a mug of hot chocolate. Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally, he asked, "How's Ryan?" I smiled sadly. "I don't know." Dad nodded slowly. "You know?" He looked out at the snow-covered backyard. "When your mother and I first got married, I almost lost her." I turned toward him. "You never told me that." "I was working 70-hour weeks." He chuckled softly. "I thought providing for the family was enough." "What happened?" "One night your mother asked me a question." He smiled at the memory. She asked, "Would you miss me because you love me or because you're used to me being here?" I felt chills. "What did you say?" I couldn't answer. He looked at me. That scared me more than anything. The next morning, Mom and I baked cinnamon rolls together. It felt like being 12 again. Halfway through kneading the dough, she asked quietly, "Do you remember when you were little and you kept bringing home injured birds?" I laughed. "I forgot about that. You always believed you could heal everything." She dusted flour from her hands. "You've always had a beautiful heart." Her smile faded. "But sweetheart," she gently touched my arm, "not everything can be loved into becoming healthy." The room became very quiet. I knew she wasn't talking about birds. Sunday evening, I drove back to Madison. Ryan was watching television when I came in. Hey, how was your trip?" "Good." He nodded. "That's good." That was the entire conversation. I unpacked my suitcase upstairs. As I folded my clothes into drawers, something unexpected happened. I realized I hadn't missed him. Not once. I missed the idea of who I wanted him to be, but I hadn't actually missed the man waiting downstairs. That realization frightened me, because love doesn't disappear in one dramatic moment. Sometimes it fades after years of feeling alone beside someone. A few days later, Megan invited me to lunch. The moment I sat down, she studied my face. "Something's different." "I spent the weekend with my parents." She smiled. "No." "What? You seem lighter." I thought about it. She was right. I still loved Ryan, but for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the entire relationship by myself. I had stopped texting first, stopped planning every evening, stopped checking whether he'd eaten lunch, stopped asking if everything was okay every time he became distant. And something fascinating happened. Nothing changed. Ryan didn't suddenly step up. He didn't call more often. He didn't notice the silence I had spent years filling. It was as if I'd quietly removed myself from a job he never realized I was doing. That hurt more than I expected, because it answered the question I had been avoiding. I hadn't been holding our relationship together. I had been holding it up alone, and the moment I stopped, nothing was left between us except habit. There's a moment in every relationship when your heart already knows the answer, but your mind keeps asking the same question, hoping the response will somehow change. I reached that moment in early February, not because Ryan had done something shocking, but because he hadn't done anything at all. The distance between us had become our normal. We still shared the same house. We still ate dinner at the same table a few nights a week. We still slept in the same bed. But it felt like we were polite roommates who occasionally remembered they used to be in love. I stopped trying to fill every silence. Ryan didn't seem to notice. The following Friday, my principal announced that Lincoln Elementary had been nominated for a statewide teaching award. The staff gathered in the library after school for the announcement. When my name was called as one of the teachers being recognized for classroom excellence, my coworkers applauded. Megan wrapped me in a hug. "I'm so proud of you." I laughed through unexpected tears. For a few minutes, I forgot everything that was waiting for me at home. Driving back to the house, I caught myself smiling. I thought about calling Ryan. Then I stopped. For years, I'd always been the first to share good news. This time, I wanted to see if he would ask about my day. He was already home when I walked in. He was sitting in his usual spot on the couch, watching a sports highlight show. "Hey," he said, without looking away from the television. "Hey." I set my purse down, waited. Nothing. He didn't ask how work went. Didn't ask why I looked happier than I'd looked in weeks. Didn't notice the certificate sticking out of my tote bag. After a full minute, I quietly walked upstairs. Halfway to the bedroom, I heard him call after me. "Can you grab me another soda while you're up there?" I stopped on the stairs. Not because of the soda, because somehow, after one of the happiest days of my career, the first thing he'd asked me was for a favor. I closed my eyes. Then I walked into the bedroom without answering. Later that night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror removing my makeup. Ryan leaned against the doorway. Did I do something? I looked at our reflections. "You didn't ask me about my day." He frowned. So? It mattered to me. I figured if something happened, you'd tell me. I wanted you to want to know. He sighed. "I don't understand why everything has to be so complicated." "It isn't complicated. It feels complicated." I turned toward him. "I received a statewide teaching award today." His eyebrows lifted. "Oh," that single word landed like a stone. "Congratulations." He smiled briefly. "That's great." Then he looked at his watch. "What do you want for dinner tomorrow?" I stared at him in disbelief. He had already moved on. My biggest professional achievement in years had lasted less than 10 seconds in his world. That weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about something. Not the award, not the argument. A memory. It was from our second year together. We'd gone hiking at Devil's Lake State Park. Halfway up the trail, I'd twisted my ankle. Ryan had carried me nearly half a mile back to the parking lot. Back then, he'd looked at me like losing me would break his heart. What happened to that man? Was he still somewhere inside the person sleeping beside me every night? Or had I been holding on to a version of him that no longer existed? I didn't know, but I needed to find out, because I couldn't spend another 6 years hoping. The following Tuesday, I asked Ryan if we could have dinner together without phones or television. He looked surprised. Sure. I cooked chicken parmesan. We sat across from each other in complete silence for the first few minutes. Finally, I took a deep breath. I need to ask you something. Okay. Are you happy with us? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he cut another piece of chicken. I guess. You guess? I don't really think about it. I felt my heart sink. I think about it every day. I know. I don't want to keep living like roommates. He looked confused. We're not roommates. Then when was the last time we went on a date? He shrugged. I don't remember. When was the last time you told me you were proud of me? Silence. When was the last time you asked me what I was dreaming about? What I was afraid of? What I wanted for our future? More silence. I wasn't asking to trap him. I was asking because I genuinely wanted to know whether we still existed beneath the routine. Finally, he looked at me. What exactly do you want from me, Emily? I took a slow breath. I want to feel chosen. His forehead wrinkled. I chose you 6 years ago. No. My voice trembled. You chose me once. Tears blurred my vision. I need someone who keeps choosing me. Ryan leaned back in his chair. I think this is just who I am. The room became perfectly still. Not because of what he said, because of what he didn't say. He didn't say he'd try. He didn't say he wanted to fight for us. He didn't ask what I needed. He simply accepted that this was enough. Enough for him. I realized then that I'd spent years waiting for someone to become the partner I needed, while he had quietly accepted the relationship exactly as it was. Neither of us was wrong. We simply wanted different things. That night, after Ryan went to bed, I sat alone in the living room. I opened the junk drawer in the kitchen. Inside was the folded sticky note from his birthday. Thanks again. See you tonight. I unfolded it carefully. Then I found other things I'd tucked away over the years without realizing why. A canceled anniversary reservation. A movie ticket I'd used alone after he'd forgotten our plans. A birthday card I'd written but never given him because he was too busy to celebrate. Tiny reminders of all the times I'd convinced myself to settle. I spread them across the coffee table. Each one looked insignificant by itself. Together, they told the story I had refused to read. It wasn't one terrible day that had broken my heart. It was hundreds of ordinary days where I had slowly disappeared, hoping that if I loved him enough, he would finally love me the way I needed. As I gathered the papers back into a neat pile, a quiet truth settled over me. For the first time since Ryan and I met, I wasn't wondering how to save our relationship. I was wondering whether it was finally time to save myself. I didn't leave Ryan the next morning. I wish I could tell you I packed a suitcase, handed him my house key, and walked away with the confidence people have in movies. Real life doesn't work that way, especially when you've built 6 years of memories with someone. Even after everything, part of me still hoped he'd notice the distance growing between us. I hoped he'd ask me to stay. I hoped he'd finally understand that I wasn't threatening to leave. I was quietly breaking, but hope has a way of keeping people trapped long after the truth has arrived. 3 days passed. Ryan acted exactly the same. He went to work. He came home. He watched television. He asked whether we needed groceries. He reminded me the car needed an oil change. He talked about taxes, insurance, his fantasy football league, everything except us. It felt like we were standing in a house that was slowly filling with water while he admired the paint on the walls. One Thursday evening, I was folding laundry when he walked into the bedroom. "You've been quiet lately." I looked up. "I have." "You mad about something?" The question almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because I realized he still thought this was about one argument, one bad week. He had no idea I had spent years trying to tell him I was lonely. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Okay, if I stop trying." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "If I stopped planning everything. If I stopped reminding you about birthdays. If I stopped asking how your day was. If I stopped reaching for your hand. If I stopped carrying this relationship." I swallowed hard. "Would you notice?" Ryan looked confused. "I don't know." That answer hurt because it was honest. The following Saturday, I visited a bookstore downtown. Books had always been my safe place. When life became too heavy, I found comfort in stories where people survived impossible things. As I wandered through the aisles, I noticed an elderly couple sitting in the cafe. The man gently adjusted his wife's scarf before handing her a cup of coffee. She smiled at him with the kind of familiarity that only comes from decades together. There was nothing dramatic about the moment. No grand gesture. No expensive gift. Just quiet care. I suddenly realized that wasn't what I had been asking Ryan for all these years. I wasn't asking for perfection. I was asking for presence. That evening, Megan came over with takeout. She looked around the quiet house. "Ryan working late?" "No, where is he?" "Watching the game in the basement." She stared at me. "While you're up here?" I nodded. She didn't say anything for a while. Finally, she asked, "Emily, if your daughter came to you one day and described this exact relationship," I looked at her, "what would you tell her?" The answer came instantly. "I'd tell her she deserves better." Megan reached across the table. "So why doesn't Emily deserve the same thing?" I burst into tears. Not because she had judged me, because she had reminded me of something I'd forgotten. My worth wasn't determined by whether Ryan chose to see it. 2 days later, I made an appointment with a therapist. Walking into that office felt strangely embarrassing. Part of me believed asking for help meant I had failed. Instead, it became one of the healthiest decisions I'd ever made. My therapist, Dr. Laura Mitchell, listened more than she spoke. Near the end of our first session, she asked a question that completely changed how I viewed my relationship. "What are you afraid will happen if you leave?" I answered immediately. "I'll lose the person I love." She nodded. "And what happens if you stay exactly as things are?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out, because I already knew. I'd lose myself. That night, I sat on the back porch wrapped in a blanket. Snow covered the yard. Everything was quiet. Ryan opened the sliding door. "You've been out here a while." "I know." "You cold?" "A little." He stood beside me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I turned toward him. "I've been thinking." He nodded. "About?" "Us." His shoulders stiffened. "What now?" I noticed the exhaustion in his voice. Not sadness. Not fear. Exhaustion. As if discussing our relationship had become an inconvenience. That was the moment something inside me became perfectly calm. Not angry. Not bitter. Just clear. "I don't think we're making each other happy anymore." Ryan looked down at the snow. After a long silence, he quietly said, "Maybe not." No argument. No denial. No promise to try again. Just, maybe not. Oddly enough, hearing him admit it brought me peace. For years, I'd been carrying both of our hope. Now I realized he'd put his down a long time ago. I was simply the last person still holding it. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote Ryan a letter. Not because I couldn't speak the words, because I wanted to say them without interruption, without either of us becoming defensive, without forgetting what mattered most. When I finished writing, I placed the envelope beside his coffee mug. Then I walked upstairs to get dressed. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I noticed something surprising. I wasn't crying. For the first time in years, I wasn't begging someone to love me. I had finally accepted the hardest truth of my life. You cannot make someone love you by loving them harder. And once I accepted that, I knew exactly what I had to do. The morning I left Ryan didn't feel dramatic. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no accusations. In fact, if someone had driven past our little house in Madison that morning, they would have seen nothing unusual at all. The sun was rising. Snow rested quietly on the rooftops. A neighbor was walking his golden retriever. Everything looked exactly the same. Only my life was about to change forever. Ryan found my letter beside his coffee mug. I was sitting at the kitchen table when he unfolded it. He read every word in silence. When he finished, he looked at me. "Is this really what you want?" I answered honestly. "No." He frowned. "Then why?" "Because what I want doesn't exist anymore." He stared at the paper. "You said you still love me." "I do." "Then why leave?" I felt tears gathering again. Because loving someone isn't the same as being loved the way you need. The room became painfully quiet. For years, I had imagined this conversation. I imagined anger, arguments, begging, promises. Instead, there was only sadness. The kind that comes when two people finally stop pretending. Ryan rubbed his hands together. I didn't know it was this bad. I looked at him gently. "I've been trying to tell you for years." I thought. He stopped speaking. "What?" "I thought you were just emotional." I closed my eyes. Those words hurt. Not because he intended to be cruel, because they explained everything. Every conversation we'd had. Every time I'd cried, every attempt I'd made to explain my loneliness. He hadn't understood the depth of my pain, because he had mistaken it for sensitivity. He wasn't listening to understand. He was listening to wait until the conversation ended. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said quietly. "I know. I really didn't. I believe you. And I did." That was the heartbreaking part. Ryan wasn't a villain. He simply wasn't capable of giving me the kind of emotional partnership I needed. Neither of us had been wrong for wanting different things, but we had been wrong for pretending love alone could bridge that gap. "I can try," he suddenly said. The words arrived months too late. I looked at him. "Can you?" He hesitated. "I don't know." That honesty almost broke me. Because for the first time in years, neither of us was pretending. "I don't want promises because you're afraid to lose me." I wiped away a tear. "I wanted effort while I was still beside you." Ryan looked down at the floor. "So this is it?" I nodded slowly. "I think it is." Moving out took less time than I expected. Most of the furniture belonged to the house. I packed clothes, books, photo albums, my grandmother's quilt, the old piano music I'd stopped playing years earlier. As I carried the last box to my car, Ryan stood quietly on the porch. "I hope you find what you're looking for." I smiled sadly. "I hope you do too." He nodded. Then, for the first time in 6 years, he hugged me without either of us pretending everything would be okay. When we pulled apart, I climbed into my car. I didn't look back. Not because I hated him, because I knew if I did, I'd find another reason to stay. And staying had already cost me too much. I rented a small apartment across town. It wasn't fancy. The kitchen was tiny. The living room barely fit a sofa. The bedroom overlooked a parking lot instead of a lake. But something remarkable happened the first night. I slept, not for 3 hours, not while waking every time my phone buzzed. I slept 8 uninterrupted hours. When I woke up the next morning, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. I realized how long my nervous system had been living in survival mode. I hadn't been resting. I'd been recovering every single day from a relationship that constantly left me emotionally empty. Over the next few months, I slowly rebuilt pieces of myself. I started playing the piano again. At first, my fingers stumbled over notes I'd once known by heart, but each evening I improved a little more. I joined a Saturday morning book club. I met women who laughed loudly without apologizing. I started hiking again. I painted. I visited my parents more often. One Sunday afternoon, Dad smiled as we walked beside a frozen lake. "I've got my daughter back," I laughed. "I never left." He squeezed my shoulder. "You almost did." Spring arrived, snow melted, flowers returned to the city. One afternoon, nearly 6 months after I'd moved out, I was watering plants on my apartment balcony when my phone rang. Ryan. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. "Hi." "Hi." His voice sounded different. Quieter. "How are you?" "I'm doing well." "I'm glad." There was a pause. "I've been seeing a therapist." That surprised me. "Really?" "Yeah." Another silence. I didn't understand how disconnected I'd become. I smiled sadly. "I'm happy you're getting help. I wish I'd done it sooner." "So do I." He laughed softly. "I don't expect anything." "I know. I just wanted you to know. You weren't asking for too much." The tears came before I could stop them. Not because I wanted him back. Because those were the words I'd spent 6 years waiting to hear. "I'm sorry, Emily." I closed my eyes. "Thank you." We talked for another 10 minutes. About work, our families, life. When we hung up, I didn't feel regret. I felt closure. Sometimes people change. Sometimes they change too late for the relationship that taught them the lesson. And that's one of the saddest truths about love. But it doesn't make the lesson any less valuable. That evening, I sat at my piano as the sun dipped below the rooftops. For the first time in years, I wasn't wondering whether someone loved me enough. I was learning to love the woman I'd spent so long neglecting, and somehow, that felt like coming home. A year after I left Ryan, I walked through the downtown farmers market in Madison with a canvas bag over my shoulder and fresh tulips tucked beneath my arm. The morning air carried the smell of roasted coffee and warm cinnamon pastries. Musicians played on the sidewalk. Children laughed as they chased pigeons across the square. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't rushing anywhere. I wasn't checking my phone every few minutes. I wasn't wondering whether someone would text me back. I was simply living. That simple feeling had once seemed impossible. Now it felt like freedom. Healing didn't happen all at once. Some mornings I still reached for my phone, wanting to tell Ryan something funny that had happened at school. Some songs reminded me of long road trips we'd taken together. Some restaurants still carried memories that made my chest ache. Healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering without feeling like your heart is breaking all over again. There were days I cried. There were days I laughed harder than I had in years. Both were part of becoming whole again. My therapist often asked me to write letters I never intended to send. One afternoon she said, "I want you to write a letter to the version of yourself who believed she had to earn love." I sat with that assignment for nearly an hour before putting pen to paper. When I finally finished, I read it aloud. "Dear Emily, you were never difficult to love. You were never too emotional. You were never asking for too much. You simply kept offering your heart to someone who couldn't hold it the way you needed. Stop apologizing for needing kindness. Stop shrinking so other people feel comfortable. The people who truly love you won't require you to disappear in order to stay. By the time I reached the last sentence, I was crying. Not because I felt broken, because, for the first time, I believed every word. A few months later, Lincoln Elementary held its annual spring carnival. Parents, teachers, and students filled the playground with games and music. As I helped one of my students win a stuffed bear, her mother smiled at me. "Miss Carter, you seem so happy lately." I laughed. "I am." Driving home that evening, I realized she was right. Happiness hadn't arrived because someone new had entered my life. It arrived because I had stopped abandoning myself. Not long afterward, Megan convinced me to join her for a charity fundraiser at a local community center. "I promise," she laughed. "I'm not trying to set you up." I wasn't worried. "You should be," we both laughed. The event was relaxed, full of volunteers serving meals and organizing donations. While carrying a box of canned food into the storage room, I accidentally bumped into a man carrying another box. "I'm so sorry," I said. He smiled. I think we were both equally responsible. His name was Ethan Brooks. He taught high school history on the other side of town. We talked for 20 minutes while sorting donations. Nothing extraordinary happened, no dramatic movie moment, no instant declaration of love, just two people having an easy conversation. As I drove home that night, I realized something unusual. I hadn't spent the evening trying to impress him. I hadn't worried whether he liked me. I had simply been myself. That alone felt like progress. Over the following months, Ethan and I became friends. Then, slowly, something more. The biggest surprise wasn't that he brought me flowers, or remembered my favorite coffee order, or called when he said he would. It was how peaceful everything felt. One rainy Saturday, we were cooking dinner together when I accidentally burned the garlic bread. I groaned. "I've ruined it." Ethan laughed. So, dinner. We'll scrape off the burnt part." I stared at him. "What? I thought you'd be annoyed." He looked genuinely confused. "Why would I be annoyed over bread?" I smiled without answering, because old versions of ourselves often expect new people to pay for old wounds. That night, I silently thanked myself for healing before asking someone else to love me. 2 years after leaving Ryan, I returned to the same winter festival where I'd once walked alone carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. Snowflakes drifted gently through the evening sky. Lights sparkled across the park. Children laughed as they skated across the ice. Ethan reached for my hand. This time, someone was actually there to hold it. We stopped beside the same little coffee stand. The young cashier smiled. 2 hot chocolates?" I looked at Ethan. He grinned. "Definitely." As she handed us the cups, I remembered the second drink I'd thrown away years earlier because the person I'd bought it for never came. Back then, I thought that lonely walk had been the saddest day of my life. Now I understood it had actually been the beginning of my freedom. Sometimes people ask me whether I regret leaving Ryan. The honest answer surprises them. No. But I also don't regret loving him. Ryan taught me something I might never have learned otherwise. Love cannot survive where only one person is doing the emotional work. You cannot convince someone to value you by sacrificing yourself. The more you abandon who you are, the less of you there is left to love. If someone has to be persuaded to choose you every single day, they have already made their decision, and one day, you have to make yours. Mine came quietly. There was no audience, no applause, just a woman sitting at her kitchen table, finally understanding that peace was worth more than uncertainty, that self-respect was worth more than unanswered questions, that being alone was far less painful than feeling alone beside someone who no longer saw her. So if you're listening to my story while wondering whether you're asking for too much, whether you're too emotional, whether you're too needy, I hope you hear this. Real love doesn't require you to beg. It doesn't ask you to become smaller. It doesn't make you earn the basic kindness every human being deserves. The day I stopped begging someone to love me wasn't the day I gave up on love. It was the day I finally chose myself, and choosing myself became the greatest love story I have ever lived. If my story resonated with you, thank you for spending this time with me. If you've ever had to choose yourself after losing someone you loved, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, the right love will never ask you to stop being who you are.